Okay, so now that we've understand the parts of an ecosystem, we're now going to focus on populations. So our essential question for today is what are ways that we can measure populations in ecosystems? So this goes with Learning Target 22. You will be able to describe how competition, limiting factors, and other factors like biotic potential, birth and death rates, exponential growth can affect population size. So the whole point of our notes are to go over what is going to affect whether a population is going to increase or decrease or stay the same. Okay, so one of the first things that's going to affect populations or population size are competition. And most species within a population compete for food and space. This is going to affect the growth of a population. So when you have competition for resources like food and space, this is going to limit the population size. They're not going to be able to grow as much. The most intense competition is between individuals of the same species because they need the same resources. For example, since we use deer a lot when we do ecosystems, deer have the same resources. They eat the same food. They need the same area for shelter. So there's going to be a lot of intense competition between other deers because they're going to compete for the same resources. Now, population size indicates whether a population is healthy or growing. So if a population is growing, then that means it's healthy. That population has enough resources for their numbers to increase. Now, things that can affect population size beside competition is the relationship between predators and prey. So remember, a predator is the consumer who eats other consumers. The prey is the organism being eaten. The presence of predators usually increase the number of different species that can live in an ecosystem. So if there's a lot of predators, then that means populations can never get too big. So that means in an ecosystem you can have more different types of populations because predators are not going to let one group grow too big where other populations cannot live in that ecosystem. So that's kind of similar to the rainforest. Now, you're going to be working a lot with what I call predator-prey cycles. So when we take a look at the predator-prey cycles, they have a certain relationship and it's best displayed through a graph. So you have the fox that feeds off the rabbit. If you notice, the rabbit is the blue line and the fox is the dotted green line. Okay, so if you notice, the rabbit population is going to increase until the fox population starts to increase to a number where they are going to start feeding off the rabbits. There's going to be more foxes than rabbits, and then that's going to cause the population to decrease. Now, what I want you guys to notice is their graphs mirror each other, but they don't happen at the same time. Before the fox population can increase, the rabbit population has to increase first because that's its food source. So that is why the rabbit population increases first. Then, once the foxes have a larger food supply, their population can start to increase. So then the fox population starts to increase. When the fox population starts to increase and they start to feed off the rabbit population starts to decrease before the fox population. Now, once the rabbit population starts to decrease because there's too many foxes, then what's going to happen is the foxes are going to run out of their food and they're going to start to compete for the food. And then their population is going to start to decrease at a later date. And this keeps happening over and over as a cycle. Rabbit population increases first, then the fox population increases, then the fox feed off on too many of the rabbits because their population is getting bigger. Rabbit population goes down. When the rabbit population goes down, the fox population starts to go down. When the fox population starts to go down, eventually the rabbit population will start to go back up because there's less fox feeding on them. So that is what the relationship between predator-prey looks like in an ecosystem. Okay, another factor that's going to affect population size is what we call a limiting factor. A limiting factor is anything that restricts the number of individuals in a population. So competition is one limiting factor. Okay, so is the relationship between predator and prey. But there's other types of factors, like shelter availability. If the ecosystem doesn't have enough shelter, then it cannot support many populations, and that's going to restrict the number of individuals in a population. Availability of food. If there's a drought and food becomes scarce, then that drought became a limiting factor that caused the population to decrease. The picture right here is showing you a picture in a forest. Space for plants is a huge limiting factor because plants need sunlight so that they can make their own food through photosynthesis. So if there is not enough room for plants to reach sunlight, then plants are going to start to die and decrease in numbers. That's what's happening a lot in the tropical rainforest. So limiting anything that's going to cause a population to decrease in size is going to be considered a limiting factor. Okay, something else that can affect population size is biotic potential. Biotic potential is the highest rate of reproduction under ideal conditions. So the best way to understand this is with an example. If you take a pumpkin versus an apple, you want to find out which one has the highest biotic potential, which one is going to have the greatest chances of reproducing and making more pumpkins or making more apples. So if you take a look at a pumpkin, when you guys know in October when you carve your pumpkins and you open them up, you have to remove all the pumpkin seeds. Well, each one of those pumpkin seeds could turn into a new pumpkin if it was planted right. So think of how many seeds come out of one pumpkin. Then take a look at an apple. There's usually only about 3 or 4 seeds in one apple. So if you think about which one has the greatest biotic potential, the pumpkins have a greater biotic potential. They have a greater chance of reproducing and increasing their population because they have more seeds than an apple. So whether an organism can reproduce effectively determines if their population can increase. Let me give you another example. Pandas, which are on the endangered species list. The reason why is female pandas can only reproduce once in their lifetime, and they can only have one offspring because the panda mom does not have enough nutrients to feed more than one baby panda. So if a mama panda has twins, she has to actually abandon one of her baby pandas because she can't support both of them. So that is one of the reasons why pandas are on the endangered species list, because they do not have a very high biotic potential. They have a very low biotic potential. Their reproduction rate is very low. So they are not able, their population size is going to start to decrease. And that's why one of the reasons why they're endangered. It's not the only one, but it's one of the reasons. So whether an organism has a high biotic potential will determine whether their population will increase or not. Humans, with the technology that we've had in the medical field, our biotic potential rate has increased substantially over the past 60 to 80 years. Up until 1926, the second cause of death among women was childbirth. And then we advanced in our medical field and technology, and now less people are dying in childbirth, and that's why the human population has continued to grow. Okay, another factor that's going to affect the population size is the birth/death rate. So if the number born is greater than the number of deaths, then the population is going to increase. If the number of born is less than the number of deaths, then the population decreases. For example, if you take the human population, in third world countries, this might occur more frequently where the number of born is less than the number of deaths because they don't have as many advantages as we do in America. So their population starts to decrease and they die out from starvation and disease. In America, our number of born is starting to increase the number of deaths due to people are living longer with all our medical advancements. So our population is actually increasing. So the relationship between birth and death rate also determines a species population size. So that's another factor. And then the last factor that we're going to talk about is exponential growth. Exponential growth is when a population continues growing until carrying capacity is reached. We are in what's called exponential growth. We have not reached carrying capacity because the Earth so far has enough resources to support our growing population. Now, eventually, if the human population continues to increase, eventually we will reach carrying capacity. Earth only has so many resources, and eventually the Earth's carrying capacity will be reached and our population might start to decrease. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that something won't happen before that. Usually when you have a population going in exponential growth there's an increase in population, that's how diseases spread very easily if it becomes overcrowded. So the closer you get to carrying capacity, overcrowding could occur. I'm not saying that could happen, but that's something that's a possibility. But right now, our population is continuing to increase and increase. So we are in what's called exponential growth, and we have not hit carrying capacity yet. Okay, so hopefully after listening to the video, you can describe what competition means, you can list anything that is a limiting factor, and you can tell the difference between you can tell how biotic potential, birth and death rate relationship, and exponential growth can affect population size. Because all of those are factors that can cause a population to either increase or decrease.